Welcome to Virtues and Vocations, Conversations on Character and the Common Good. This series is part of Virtues and Vocations, a national forum housed at the Institute for Social Concerns at the University of Notre Dame and supported by the Kern Family Foundation. Virtues and Vocations seeks to foster a community of practice among scholars and practitioners from across disciplines who are keen to understand how best to cultivate character and moral purpose in higher education and the professions. This webinar is one way we facilitate these conversations. I'm Suzanne Shanahan, and I direct the Institute for Social Concerns. I'm also host of this series. Our conversation today will run until about 12:40, when we'll open it up for your questions. You can submit a question anytime through the Q&A mechanism, and I will pose them directly at about 12:40. Here at Virtues and Vocations, over the past 3 years, we've had several conversations with leaders from various HBCUs, including Spelman and Howard, talking about the critical role of HBCUs in civil rights, democratic change, but also in their emphasis on formation of character and leadership. Today, we are beyond excited to introduce Professor Deondra Rose, who has a fabulous new book on Black excellence, HBCUs, and American democracy. In this unusual moment in the history of American democracy and higher education, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Rose's expertise with us today. Dr. Deondra Rose is the Kevin D. Gorder Professor of Public Policy at Duke University's Sanford School of Public Policy. She holds secondary appointments in the Department of Political Science and the Department of History. She is a leading scholar on the U.S. higher education policy and inequality. She is former director of POLIS, the Center for Politics at Duke University, and she was the 2024 Duke Presidential Fellow. Rose currently serves on the steering committee of the North Carolina Scholars Strategy Network, an affiliate of the National Organization of College and University-Based Researchers interested in improving policy and strengthening democracy. She, as I said, is author of The Power of Black Excellence, HBCUs, and the Fight for American Democracy with Oxford University Press, which examines the role of historically Black colleges and universities in shaping American democracy. Welcome, Deondra.
Thank you so very much, Suzanne. It's wonderful to be here with you today. And I should say, to be back at Notre Dame, I was a member of the community for 2 years as a postdoc before I came to Duke. So it's always a delightful to be in community with you.
Wonderful. It's always nice that these conversations can be a bit of a homecoming. So great to have you back. So we usually start these conversations with a little bit of background. I would love to know how you first became interested in the history of higher education, educational policy, what your own educational trajectory might have been, and when the kernel of this thinking first emerged for you personally.
So, higher education and education more broadly was just woven into my entire childhood and coming of age experience. And I'm a first generation college graduate, but so many people in my family valued education. I mean, it was something to which we aspired greatly and held in high esteem. My family went to a school system that was renowned for being innovative in terms of providing excellent curricular experiences, but also diverse educational experiences at Shaker Heights, Ohio. And so I grew up in Shaker Heights. And then very early on, knew that I wanted to study politics. And so I became a political scientist. I went to the University of Georgia. And when I was there, I was actually planning to study education, but I wanted to be a lawyer. So I was heading to law school. And at some point took a detour when my professors actually said, we think that, you could be a really great researcher. You should consider getting a PhD. And the rest is history. So I became a very sort of devoted researcher and scholar of higher education and really the connection between education and democracy. So the thread that is woven through all of my work is this question of how policymakers can use educational programming to promote democratic citizenship. Political scientists have long shown that people who have higher levels of educational attainment are significantly more likely to vote, to contribute to campaigns, to volunteer for political candidates or causes, and they're more likely to be tapped to do those things. So for me, I'm also especially interested in how we can help historically marginalized, minoritized, or excluded communities to move more fully into their citizenship. And I think education is a critical piece of that. So that's a lot of how I came to study education. And I guess to your other question, Suzanne, about this particular project, it was really a set of statistics that came from the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. And they blew my mind. So, according to the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, a full 50% of Black lawyers in the United States, 40% of Black members of Congress, and 80% of Black judges in the US are HBCU alumni. And so, as a political scientist, somebody who studies power and studies democratic citizenship, I'm like, is there something going on at HBCUs that is incubating future engaged citizens and people who are assuming leadership positions in our society? And so that's really how this project came about.
Great. So, would you mind sharing the basic thesis of the book? It's this extraordinary, beautiful history, but if you could boil that down for folks who may not have read it yet, although I'm sure folks will run out after this webinar.
So the central research question driving the analysis is there something particular to HBCUs that is helping to promote American democracy? So my argument is that there's a combination of things. So it's a particular educational experience, particularly one that is driven by a particular faculty, a culture of HBCUs that is really promoting high levels of sort of political engagement and senses of political agency. So that's really where the study goes. So I start by tracing the historical political development of HBCUs, asking this question of, to what extent were HBCUs disruptive from their inception in 1837? And what did that disruption look like? And then I use quantitative analysis of survey data supplemented by interviews in order to get a sense of what that HBCU experience is like for Black students and Black alumni. So I really delve into questions like, what kinds of activities did you participate in college? What kind of curriculum did you engage in? Was it explicitly political? And then to get a sense of, to sort of tease out from those data, if we're noticing that, Black people who went to HBCUs are significantly more likely to report engaging in political activities during college, I use interviews to get a little more color of what that looked like and how it came about. So that's really sort of the book in a nutshell.
Great, thank you for that. So I'm hoping we can pull this apart a little bit. So I do think this notion that there's something extraordinary about the ethos at HBCUs that really cultivates this political engagement, a very compelling argument. If we break that down into pieces, certainly one of the pieces you talk about really being important over this long historical period is the role of faculty. How are faculty at HBCUs different than your typical faculty at Duke or elsewhere, for example?
So, I mean, to go back to that early history of HBCUs, to be a Black scholar in the 19th century was disruptive. So, at a time when, so just to talk about what the government was doing, we had state sanctioned policies historically that really did establish the subjugation of Black Americans. So, state sanctioned enslavement, anti-literacy laws, racial segregation, racial discrimination. And HBCUs, and I should say that the part of what those laws and policies worked to do was to express or to convey the sense that Black Americans were not suited to the full mantle of citizenship, to engaging in, helping to select those who would wield power in our polity, so the vote, or holding office themselves. So I think, to educate Black Americans and to do so unabashedly and explicitly with the expressed goal of uplifting a race was very particular to HBCUs. And so, many of us think of sort of an ivory tower model of academia. And, it's sort of like colleges and universities, researchers exist or need to exist away from the messiness of society and politics. For HBCUs, that was never the case. I know I'm speaking very broadly, but
Mhm.
that objective of uplifting and empowering a historically excluded and minoritized and marginalized population was explicitly political. And so, who did that work? The early faculty, people like Carter G. Woodson or W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, really helped to imbue the American discourse on race and questions of justice and equality with a new set of ideas regarding Black people. And they did this work, and I would argue that this work was, in addition to being disruptive, it was revolutionary because there were other scholars who were arguing again that Black people perhaps had, brains that were of a different size, or really just, using scholarship to degrade and denigrate Black Americans. So the early faculty who were ensconced in HBCUs, who had posts at HBCUs, used that work in a very political way. Fast forward for so many generations of Black students who went through HBCUs, their faculty were important mentors. So, not only providing academic experiences and expertise that really helped them to move into professions and to become the intellectuals that their institutions knew them to be, but then also modeled Black excellence every day. So their very presence in our educational landscape was also transformative and, I would argue, revolutionary. There were institutions like Wilberforce that were really kind of cranking out teachers, and you had teachers during the Reconstruction period in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s were going into the South and not only embodying Black excellence, but also helping to teach others and to bring them along and help them to, in turn, demonstrate Black excellence. So that work of the Black faculty early on was really transformative. And then you hear, like, one of the things I loved about the interviews was to a person. Every interview subject who attended an HBCU talked about the significance of their professors. And they talked about their professors as being almost familial. They say, this wasn't just my bio professor or my English professor. I mean, she was talking to me like she was my mom, or he was talking to me like he was my uncle. And they had these stories of faculty members who would go to their dorms when they were sick and bring soup, or knock to find out why they overslept and weren't on the bus because we're going to the Civil Rights Museum, so you better get up and be on the bus in 15 minutes. For me, that wasn't that wasn't my approach to teaching. And I've been inspired by a lot of what I've learned in doing this research, and it's helped me to engage, I think, more fully with my students holistically.
Great. So there are a couple of pieces here that I think are important, but for many educators feel like they're in tension. And so one of them is this critical importance of excellence. So scholarly excellence combined with this disruptive and or deliberatively political engagement, right? So I I think more so than ever, we are parsing these in higher education, and trying to move political engagement out of the scholarly enterprise for various reasons. And can you imagine this as a way forward to certainly double down and do more with HBCUs, but as a more generalizable model for other kinds of mission-based institutions, right? Because I do think lots of higher education is trying to extract itself and return to pure excellence.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, how we define excellence is so important. And I think for educational institutions, we talk about this a lot. Like as a scholar of higher education, I spend so much time thinking about like, what is it that we do? What is our value to society? Like, why ought we invest so much time, so much money in sending our young people to college? And I think this is an important question. Like it's easy to pretend that it's a flippant one, but I think it's essential. And to my mind, the best education is not one where students are taught what to think. It's of course helping students to become critical thinkers and to know how to think. And I think that's also something that was essential in the HBCU history and legacy. It was really helping young people to feel comfortable having difficult conversations and unpacking difficult topics with an eye toward problem solving. So I think that's also essential, that it wasn't just sophistry, like we're talking through these topics to talk through them. You know, for this particular population of students, overwhelmingly Black, African American, and Black, there was a real stake in how to answer these questions about justice and citizenship and equality. So, really helping students to find a forum where they can grapple with these difficult topics and where they can then figure out some solutions for dealing with them and helping to contribute to solutions on the horizon outside of their school. So I think, to my mind, excellence is that. Like it's really crafting a style of education that is valuable to society, and in addition, valuable to the individuals who participate in it.
So this seems a, a very critical point that you're making about how we define excellence in a more multidimensional way. And one of the elements that comes through really loud and clear in the book is this role of faculty. And in the context of a place like Notre Dame, where you have experience, we think a lot about student formation in a very holistic way. We think about not just, heart, mind kind of connections, not just learning the material, but becoming really a better person. Um, it- Sort of the faculty role here is quite specific, um, and plays a much more relational role than I think even a lot of faith-based institutions or other mission-based institutions do. The example of, someone going and rousing you out of your bed because you're late for the bus, right? Or just engaging you in a way that your success matters tremendously to them. Um, Feels like it's a politics unto itself, if you will, that's part of the political effort. So I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about what that looks like.
I love how you describe that too, Suzanne, because you're absolutely right. Like there's something explicitly political in helping to imbue a young person with the sense that you are excellent. You might not know it yet, you might
So,
not see it yet, but I see it in you, and here's how I'm going to help you get there. So, I mean, the way I've been thinking about it and really sort of came to think about it in the course of doing the study, like it's more akin to coaching than say, the model of a professor as sort of this, font of wisdom imparting knowledge on students. You're really part of a team and you're acting as a coach. And there was an interview subject who I spoke with, and I mean the conversation's imprinted in my mind, and he said, the remarkable thing about my HBCU, and he went to Morehouse, he said, is that you could take the son of a sharecropper like me and the son of a Chicago industrialist like my roommate. And at the end of 4 years, we would both feel like we could take on the world and we had the skills and the knowledge to do it. And there were so many accounts of faculty members, a diverse set of faculty members, by the way. Like that's the other thing that I think is also essential that people recognize about HBCUs is their diversity. So right now, a full 24% of HBCU students are non-Black. A substantial proportion of HBCU faculty have historically been non-Black. So you have stories of people saying that, my professors who were Black, who were, South Asian, who were white, viewed us with excellence and valued our experience. Like there was something really special about having faculty members who understood, where you're coming from and what you might be grappling with, and still helped you to have a sense of efficacy and to build a sense that, you understand in a clear-eyed way what the challenges are that our society is working with. But instead of, sort of marching off and saying, forget society, there's a sense of agency. Like we have a responsibility to help fix it. And just like these generations who came before us, many of whom occupied these halls, we too can make a positive difference for everyone. So I think that was a really important part of what, students, when we talk about this in higher ed, students come and go from campuses every 4 years, 2 years, 6 years, and so on. But the faculty create a constant in our institutions. And I think as an institutionalist, recognizing the consistency that they provide in terms of setting a culture and setting these values is essential.
So I found this super interesting because there are a couple of different pieces here. So part of this is a posture of a faculty role is enabling the excellence of all students, and really in a multidimensional way. But there's also a piece of this that seems super important, which is that excellence is driven toward contributions to society. So we have lots of students who are excellent, good, right? They're good humans, but their vocation is self-directed. It's not about the public good in a profound way. So a piece of this too is the culture that says, your job is to pursue excellence and faculty supports you in that endeavor, but it's excellence in support of the public or common good, which is a really interesting dimension of that. The other piece I'm hearing you talk about is the role of faculty as exemplars. And so could you talk a little bit about yeah, what does that mean, right? How do the faculty position themselves? Do you have a sense of how faculty are recruited differently or brought into the culture any differently? Or is that not a piece you looked at?
So I wasn't able, like, I didn't do interviews or surveys of HBCU faculty. So much of what I learned was by way of the accounts of alums.
Mhm.
And so, my sense though is that there was very much like from a student's perspective, the value of seeing Black excellence role modeled every day,
Mhm.
going to a campus where it wasn't viewed as an exception to be, like an amazing Black chemist or an amazing Black historian. All of your faculty are amazing, and it's just what we do. Like there was something that was very, um, sort of like ordinarily extraordinary in the presence of these Black faculty members. And for students, and they say this, so one of the questions that I really delved into was sort of, why did you decide to attend an HBCU? And a number of people talked about having sort of suboptimal K through 12 experiences, or the experience of being like the only person who looked like them racially in their K through 12 environment. And they wanted to go to a place where, they didn't have to justify sort of their presence or have all these questions about, how they got there, why they got there, whether they belong there. Like there are some interesting dynamics on that front as well. But but many people mention just the significance in a society where, in many cases, the highest echelons of power, of wealth, are not especially diverse. To go into a place where the people who are, leading departments and teaching your curriculum and, leading your university look like you was essential.
Um, do you think that I'm thinking about, we just had this workshop through the Virtues and Vocations Initiative about how to cultivate character and virtue in the classroom. And Sam Dean, who's our pedagogy expert, who designed and led the workshops, really emphasizes the kind of human a faculty member is. And you can't you can't teach virtue if you're not virtuous to a certain extent. And so is it your sense that, right, I know you didn't talk to faculty or Dawn, but that the faculty have a substantively different approach to what they're doing in the classroom or as a vocation, if you will, because this both the whole person dimension, the disruptive elements, this way of being an exemplar, and offering a really different view of what's possible in life, but also the obligations to pursue a different political reality, a different form of political engagement seems so important. Is this something that happens just as a matter of individuals cultivating it, or did you get a sense in the interviews that there's really a profoundly different culture in these spaces?
You get that sense. And I mean, again, it's hard to make a tight causal
Yeah.
connection there. But even anecdotally, I gave a talk a couple months ago at North Carolina Central University, an HBCU here in Durham, North Carolina. And I remember at the end of the talk, there was a student, I think he was a grad student who had attended, and he came up and he said, what you said about people being like family is absolutely true. And my professor is over there and she's just like family. And so he was just singing this professor's praises, right? About 5 minutes later, when it was time, like I had some books that I was signing, and the student comes over and he wants to buy a copy of the book. Well, his professor buys the copy for him. And I watched them argue, and the students, I cut hair, I can cut more hair, and I'm gonna buy this book with my money. And she's like, no, like I've got this for
Yeah,
you. And I'm watching this in real time, like, oh my gosh. I mean, it really and so we have things like that. And I will say, like, many educators in lots of spaces approach their engagement with students with that same sense of care and almost like a familial engagement. I will say also, though, structurally, I mean, we know that HBCUs historically have been underfunded, certainly not equitably funded with their PWI counterparts. And so, just the role of attracting and retaining amazing faculty members is, I think, a really important imperative that HBCUs grapple with. And so, for me as a faculty member, just thinking about the lift of what it takes to just focus on curriculum, being a faculty member, it's hard work. And so to take that on and to be a great mentor, to be a great coach, again, so many stories of professors rounding up students on the weekend as they're about to go out and party, and you're like, you didn't have the book for my class, you're going to be coming over for dinner and we're going to review the lesson. As a professional, that's a lot of yourself to
yeah,
give to the job. And so, my sense is that's mission work, and that's the kind of vocational engagement that we do when we are engaged in work that is beyond, paycheck work or prestige work. Like, it really is like you're putting your heart and soul into that work.
that's great. To what extent do you think it's possible to, in other spaces, cultivate this magic of HBCUs to um, is it possible in mission-driven universities? Is it possible in small liberal arts colleges to have this strong, strong commitment to both the public or common good and to kind of whole person student formation? Or is there something about the historical trajectory of HBCUs and that very distinctive role in American politics that is always going to differentiate them in some ways? Like, what, in other words, what can we learn and what is not possible to transfer?
That's a great question. I think there's so much to learn. So, I mean, one, to go back to our earlier conversation about community and, the idea of uplifting a race and really thinking about how to engage people in a way that is more than individually, because in order to uplift a race, you have to do that in more than just by ones and twos. And so I think, having a sense of purpose that is community oriented and unabashedly so is one of the lessons I think that we can take. And some of that is being very clear on what our purpose is, like what's the impact that we hope to have on society. Is it an explicitly democratic one? Is it explicitly to help empower people to do something that we're not seeing happening sort of widely right now? One of the things for me as a political scientist that I think a lot about is how many people are disengaging from the democratic landscape. Like many people are sort of giving up. They're disengaging, and they're exhausted, they're disaffected. So I think there's a really important role that higher education can play in helping people to understand that democratic citizenship is not a political thing, that there are ways to engage as a citizen, conversations that we must have as citizens, tough conversations that we must have as citizens with people who are not like us, people we disagree with, people, with whom we have some dissent. I think helping us to do that, to have spaces to do it, and to build the skills and comfort with doing that is an important role for higher ed. I think also just helping to reinforce the value of communities and the value of, we recognize, I think, pretty well the significance of ourselves and our sort of engagement as individuals in our society, economically, socially, and politically. But I think also to help us to appreciate the value of our collective well-being and thriving is something that we can't take for granted. And I suspect that perhaps in our society, we're not investigating that or unpacking that enough.
Right.
So yeah, I think those are some of the important lessons, but I do think the history is distinct. I think there's something to be said about generations upon generations that have been built up with this understanding that we are about the community. And this is something I also heard from interviews, like individuals would tell me, I went to church and I was heading to my HBCU the next month, and, there were these women in the church who were domestics. They worked as housekeepers and cooks. They didn't know what North Carolina Central University was, but they knew that it was a college. I was going there, and they felt like my success there was our success. And they would put, wads of money in my hand and tell me to study hard. There was a sense of responsibility that people took with them. Others who said, my parents told me that for me to graduate with this degree and to get a great job, that wasn't, that was step one. My responsibility was to bring my community with me, to do good things, to make this world better than when I got here. I mean, those values that are inculcated in what you're learning, on campus, sort of from your family, I think, the extent to which we can imbue those values throughout our landscape, educationally and socially, I think that's essential.
Yeah. So there are two great nuggets I'm taking from this. One, you said that democratic citizenship is not political, right? That it doesn't need to be hyper politicized. And I know you worked on initiatives at Duke around this. Could you talk about a particular intervention or an approach that enabled students, community members, faculty to think about democratic citizenship, not in a hyper partisan way.
Honestly, I think the conversations that we've had across differences have been the very best.
Mhm.
Because oftentimes when we think about democracy, it's easy to go straight to the explicitly political. So let's talk about voting, let's talk about running for office, and those are important. I'd say an extremely significant antecedent, though, is the ability to talk through issues, to talk through problems, and to have real conversations, not just these sort of superficial or you know, oftentimes I get frustrated because I feel like even in our contemporary media landscape, there's not a whole lot of space for long form
Mhm.
engagement with topics. Like oftentimes, there's sort of a like a snap sense of what a concept means, and we don't unpack them. And sometimes I feel like the people who actually spend the time thinking about these topics and ideas opt out of participating in the conversations because it's dangerous. Like, who wants to, get canceled or, have people come after them on Twitter? I think this is also an important role for researchers, for scholars, and this is why I'm engaged in the Scholar Strategy Network, because I think that there's a responsibility for those of us who have the privilege of studying for a living and really, helping to unpack difficult issues, to engage in conversations about them. And again, they're not easy, and I think there has to be a space for that kind of work to happen. But I think we've done that for like incoming students, working with places like Braver Angels and Bridge USA. They're amazing in helping to facilitate conversations on issues that are not easy, and to help students have an incentive to maybe even leave their own sense of what they think at the moment aside, and to grapple with issues from a range of perspectives. I think even giving our students permission to assume a different perspective, or to just listen, to actually not have all the answers. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have as educators, is that oftentimes what helps our students to get to us at these fantastic educational places is that they're awesome and they're right and they have the answers and they're used to showing us that they know things. In many cases, our students are still exploring and trying to figure things out. And as a professor, I've worked to be much more humble in showing, like, I'm still figuring things out too. I can tell you about a time when I've changed my mind about something in the face of new evidence. So I think that intellectual humility is also something that I take as a valuable lesson from HBCUs, but something that we sort of writ large in higher ed would do really well to learn from and to export.
Great. The other piece you talked about was the really explicitly community-centric notion of an HBCU education. So it's not just about the individual, but it's really about uplift of a community and about the responsibilities of an HBCU education. Um, can you imagine ways that that ethos translates into a place like Duke or Notre Dame?
Absolutely. So one of my favorites is that many HBCUs have requirements, community service requirements for graduation. And this seems pretty elegant and not especially complicated. But again, if they're substantial, like these are not easy to satisfy criteria. At one local HBCU, students had to log 100 hours of community service to graduate. If you transferred in as a junior, you did not get a prorated community service requirement. And I think it again sent that signal very powerfully, just like we take, English 101 and stats and math seriously as a part of what it means to graduate with this degree, we take engaging with the community equally seriously. And I think that's powerful. Like I think at least in my own educational experience, having the opportunity to sort of break away from my books, to talk to people, to see more of the world, to actually get a sense of how I can be helpful. Like again, that agency that the community work helps to provide really was essential to my education and also just how I engage with the world as a citizen. So I think that's also really valuable. Like, Suzanne, if I were to go on my soapbox about higher education in the 21st century, I think that we miss many opportunities to step back and ask the big questions. What do we need to know and to master now to be empowered, informed, and capable citizens today? I think that looks differently than, say, in the 19th century, in the 20th century. But I don't know that we do that same examination. We have curriculum rehauls, like we do those kinds of adjustments. But I mean, really asking, right now, oftentimes, we see that students find it hard to dissent. They'd rather just kind of, not pursue something than to gain an enemy or lose a friend. And we have to help all of us understand that, like, we can actually disagree and remain friends. And I think that's, like, just helping us to gain those kinds of skills and to exercise them. That should be, like, firmly, my opinion, in all higher educational curricula today.
Great. One of the facts I found really interesting is that till 1964, about 90% of Black college graduates came from HBCUs. Um, can you talk about sort of what's happened since then, in terms of where Black graduates are going, what the implications have been of that for HBCUs, but for higher education? And then also read in the New York Times yesterday that, what is it, about 80% of HBCU enrollment is women, right? Or like what's happening there? So what are the general demographic dynamics that you're seeing at the moment? And if you could speculate on the implications of that, or if there are none.
Yeah, so the demographic shifts for HBCUs since the mid 20th century, the 1960s, has been, like, substantial. So as you say, before 1964, 90% of Black Americans attended HBCUs. Today, about 300,000 Americans attend HBCUs. That's about 9% of America's Black college students, about 2% of all American college students. So, since and of course, what's interesting is that the civil rights victories that were crafted in strategy, like in Howard University's law school, for example, that helped all of us to have more choice when it comes to deciding where to pursue college degrees, led to a new competition for Black students. And so, one of the challenges that many HBCUs face is that they've never been supported at the same level financially as their PWI, predominantly white institution counterparts. And, that goes back to land grant policy from the 19th century. And so, to my mind, one of the great imperatives in higher education, and I would argue in our democracy, is working to ensure that HBCUs have the resources and support necessary to continue doing this essential work. And that work is broadly beneficial, on a big policy scape level. If you think about the rights movements that we've seen since the mid 20th century, they were guided by and influenced by the strategies, the scholarship, the sort of intellectual foundation that came out of these institutions. But then you also see the significance of producing actively engaged citizens and leaders. That's another powerful impact and contribution that HBCUs have made and continue to make. And every year, like, providing such important educational opportunities to such a broad range of American college students. Today, many people are surprised to note just the demographic changes in HBCUs. You have HBCUs like West Virginia State that are actually predominantly white. I want to say 77% of West Virginia State students are white students. And so HBCUs are also helping to educate a broad segment of the population. And I would say that, it's also interesting to note, historically, HBCUs have always been egalitarian. So admitting women when many American colleges and universities did not. admitting without regard to racial background when many colleges and universities did. So there's also just this history of inclusiveness and a commitment to empowering everyone at HBCUs that I think all of higher ed could learn from.
Great. So questions are queuing up, so I'm going to turn to those now, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Um, Deondra, in your time conducting interviews, was there anything pointing to mental health factors while attending an HBCU? Or what may that look like in comparison to a PWI in your experience?
That's a great question. So I don't recall anything explicitly touching on mental health.
Mhm.
Students did talk about health though, like even sort of like sexual health or, just some of the sort of generational differences on campuses where students were excited to sort of push the administration to provide different resources. I remember some conversation related to like Spelman and Bennett College on that score. Thinking about though, like the increasing significance of mental health support in American higher education today, my sense is that institutions that are chronically undersourced and underfunded, you know, I think are they bear an additional burden when it comes to providing that kind of support. So, at an institution like Duke that has substantial resources, it's still hard for us, is my sense, because, and I think for any institution, because, mental health challenges are increasingly um, I think we see them and the need for this support and to do this extraordinarily well on campus to ensure the well-being of our students. It's something that, like, to my mind, so it has to be a top priority for any college or university. And my sense is that when colleges and universities don't have enough resources, there are areas that suffer. And my hunch is that this would be one of them. So
Yeah,
not from like this is more anecdotally, but that's my
oh,
sense.
yeah. I think it's a really interesting question, right? So certainly the lack of resources would be a challenge, as likely would the fact that people are coming perhaps from under-resourced backgrounds that really compounds the challenges. Yet at the same time, there's research at Duke that would say the extraordinary sense of purpose, moral purpose, self-transcendent purpose that comes from an HBCU education is one of the things that actually mediates mental health challenges. So you might have both things happening at once. Yeah, sort of a good study for the questioner to do on their own. So
I agree.
I
Can I
don't
can
know.
I sort of
Yeah.
tag on to that? So that's right. Like when you compare Black Americans who attended HBCUs versus those who attended PWIs, conversations about the microaggressions and macroaggressions that students experience on campus emerges as a really powerful theme. So like there's a lot of isolation that Black students at PWIs express having. And just even having the bandwidth to engage in academics can be limited when you're grappling with other, discrimination or, just things that do lead to those kinds of mental health challenges. So that's absolutely right.
So next question, Dr. Rose, thank you so much for joining us today. I've thoroughly enjoyed learning from you. During your interviewing process for your latest book, what stories stood out to you the most? What stories surprised you? Are there any that you're just like, this was the best ever?
Oh, I love this question so much. I mean, I can hear the voices. So, many of the interviews were conducted by phone. They typically lasted between 30 minutes and I'd say like an hour and 15 minutes was the max. And some of them, like you could sense just the love that people had for their institutions and just their excitement to recount their experiences. So, okay, let's see. I think there are a number that stand out to me. And there was a woman who was an alumna of Delaware State, and she was explaining what it was like to go there in the 1970s. And at some point she talked about how the Klan, like the KKK, would come and burn crosses at the university and they would sort of say their thing and then they like off they go and the students just like they just expected it was like clockwork. And so, for me, just thinking about the politics of space and what it means to have an HBCU community where you know and the world knows like this is a place that is committed to the empowerment of Black scholars and Black citizens. And then you still have these efforts to kind of perform hatred in those otherwise, presumably safe spaces was fascinating. This same research subject, though, like even though like she has this part of her story, you know, the preponderance of the story was the joy of being at her HBCU, like the social inclusion, how she felt wrapped in a community that loved her, how socially they, and this was a campus where there were white students, but she said many of the white students were commuters. And so they would kind of come and go. There was kind of a sense that maybe they were nervous about being there on campus overnight. But she was, I mean, it was just a really interesting sort of sense of sort of self and existence and inclusion in that Black community, but also an awareness of the broader society around them. So that conversation was probably an hour and a half, and I just remember it being like I wanted to be best friends with this person. So like as a scholar, like just having to be like really um, distanced. Um, I think there were other people who talked a lot about just sort of coming into their own and understanding their role in history. So for me, just hearing about, people saying like, we knew that Stokely Carmichael, had been here. I strolled across my campus and I ran into W.E.B. Du Bois, and I made sure to shake his hand. That was John Lewis actually who said that. I mean, there were so many instances where like Black history was a part of the curriculum, but it was also a part of the space, like the brick and mortar plant. And that also had an important bearing on the stories that people had and just how they interpret their experience. So those are some of the ones that stood out to me. But I could talk about those all day.
Great, thank you. Next one is, I was interested in whether or not you saw a variation in dedication to civil service based on the type of HBCU, state versus private, Methodist versus Baptist, et cetera. Did you see any difference in how HBCUs operated in the past versus now?
That's a great question. So my data did not allow me to delve into that. And I would be interested in that question also because there, to my mind, there is, even in terms of, support for public HBCUs versus private HBCUs, to my mind, just the diversity of HBCUs and sort of, the resources they're working with, their respective histories is also something worth taking into account. So also another question that might be
Yeah,
ripe for future study.
great. Um, Interrelated questions. Oh, wow, this is a complicated one. Okay. What can current HBCU leaders, for example, Tuskegee University President Mark Brown, do to increase national appreciation of and support for what HBCUs contribute to our country? And two, what can the rest of us do to support them? I'm a white Harvard faculty member and chair of the advisory board for the National Center for Bioethics at Tuskegee.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you for this question. So, okay. I had the honor yesterday of meeting President Glover, former president of Tennessee State University, just yesterday. And like even just talking to her and getting a sense of the HBCU president experience was fascinating for me. And I also spent some time last week at the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, which advocates for HBCUs, particularly the public HBCUs, and they work to convene presidents and other leaders from HBCU. So, to my mind, one of the things that I think could really be a source of power and enhanced, continued enhanced influence is working collectively. The more we can do to help sort of our my sense is, and I learned this in my research, that among HBCU alumni and people who are in families with HBCU graduates, there's a clear understanding of the significance and value of HBCUs. I mean, like we hear people talk about like I'm fifth generation HBCU grad. There's such pride and such esteem I think that continuing to share that story and to make very clear that impact and with everyone, I think is essential. And part of doing that, I think, is to work collaboratively and as sort of a broader community. And I think about like just the Higher Education Act of 1965 really created for the first time this concept of HBCUs. Before that, policy that defined HBCUs as any institution established before 64 with the express purpose of empowering and educating Black Americans. Before that, each HBCU was considered to be, just one unique college in the landscape of American higher ed institutions. So there's something really powerful about thinking about HBCUs as a collective and as a community. So I think leveraging that community is important. In terms of how can we support HBCUs, honestly, one of the things that I'm most excited about for this book is that I've committed 50% of my author royalties to the Thurgood Marshall Foundation. So, like, I'm always, sort of yelling about the historical underfunding of HBCUs. And I think finding ways to contribute to HBCUs and to help rectify that gap is important to me. So I think the more we can do to support HBCUs in terms of advocacy, in terms of helping people understand their significance and their contributions to our democracy and our collective stake in their well-being is essential. So thank you so much for that question.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for making that contribution of the book. And we'll be sure to make sure everybody knows where to get the book. So one final question. We could talk all day here, but limited time. So what does society look like with thriving HBCUs from your perspective? If HBCUs were to be at their very best, well-funded, humming along, what does our society look like? How is it different for you?
That's a great question. So, my sense is that I would like to think that our conversations about identity, about some of these essential democratic topics like justice and citizenship and equality would be even more productive, more informed. I think that there are some, like, and I've learned this from my research, like there are some perspectives on American history, on global history, just even taking a global approach to thinking about power dynamics, or even thinking about, this is something that came out. People talked about how no matter what you study, if you are an intro to psych or English 101, you're learning about the contributions that Black people have made. So I think that, to have a more robust set of citizens who are well versed in the collective contributions of historically marginalized and minoritized communities would really sort of advance our society in important ways. The educational opportunities, the scientific discovery, just all of the advances that can come out of fully funded HBCUs, just like fully funded PWIs, would be essential. So, to my mind, the best of our educational contributions would be amplified if we did right by HBCUs.
That's great. As we wrap up, is there any teaser on what you're currently working on?
So I've been absolutely exploring new topics, and I really am, like, I find myself embedded in thinking through the purpose of higher education. And in the 21st century, what are the things that we can do to, again, promote sort of a more thriving democratic landscape? And I think this topic of talking together and finding ways to build that into the curriculum, like how do we reimagine higher education in a way to be completely and sort of inexplicably relevant, or I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for, but like unabashedly relevant to today and the needs of our society. That's what I'm grappling with. So trying to figure out how I'd like to come at that is what I've been spending a lot of fun time doing.
Well, great. It seems like a hugely, hugely important topic. So I just want to thank you so much for being with us, and thank everybody who spent their lunch hour with us today. Please join us on April 21st for a conversation on civility, courage, and conviction with Dana L. Cunningham, Pierre and Pamela Omidyar, Dean of Tufts University, Jonathan M. Tisch, College of Civic Life, and Jed Atkins, Director and Dean of the School of Civic Life and Leadership at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So Deondra, this was just fabulous, and I really do hope everybody goes out and buys the book. It's a beautiful, wonderful lyrical history that is crazy informative about a critical topic. And I think for anybody, it gives you lots of good ideas about how to be a better educator. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, and thank you, everybody. It's been delightful to spend time with you. Thanks so much for having me.